In the heart of a quiet village where stories moved faster than the wind, there lived a merchant named Matumbo. People knew him as a strong, respected man, the kind who always had an answer, always kept his back straight and his voice steady. But what they didn't see was the storm inside him, the fear that had been quietly eating away at his spirit. Matumbo was not a cruel man. He wasn't bitter or jealous by nature, but something had started to grow in the silence between him and his wife, Nalia. A question, a doubt. Did she still love him? Not just care for him out of habit or kindness, but truly love him? That question began to haunt him so deeply that one day, Matumbo decided to do something unthinkable. He would pretend to be crippled, to fake an accident and act as if he could no longer walk. Not because he wanted pity, and certainly not to punish Nalia, but because he needed to see her truth, and maybe his own. The morning he chose to begin his act, the sky was gray and heavy. Clouds hung low like sorrow, and the air carried a stillness that matched his heart. It was a Sunday, a day for prayers and selling fruit in the market square. But Matumbo did not go. He lay in bed, unmoving, while whispers began to slip through the streets like mist. He had hurt his back, people said. He couldn't feel his legs. He was paralyzed. He faked the pain with a face full of suffering, his limbs still, his voice strained and slow. It was almost too real. Not because he was a skilled actor, but because the ache in his heart made everything else feel true. This wasn't just a trick. It was a desperate search for clarity. Only one person knew the truth. His older brother, a man named Atambo, calm and quiet, whose hands had shaped both wood and wisdom over the years. Matumbo called him to his side and told him everything. "I didn't fall," he said, his voice soft, his eyes low. "There's no pain in my body, only in my soul." Atambo didn't speak at first. His brow furrowed, but he listened. "I have to know," Matumbo continued, "if Nalia loves me, or if she only stays because it's what's expected. Because of duty, because of routine. I don't want to live a lie. Before I die for real, I want to know if I've been living in love, or in emptiness." His brother sighed, removing his straw hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "This is dangerous," he said. "Lies are shadows. They grow and darken everything around them. What if she finds out? What if the truth isn't what you want to see?" "Then let it break me now," Matumbo whispered. "But don't let me grow old pretending everything's all right when it's not." And so they made a pact, a bitter one. Atambo would tell no one, not the curious neighbor, not the pastor who came once a week, not even the children. In the days that followed, Atambo helped change the room. He brought in an old wheelchair from their late mother's house, added pillows, whispered explanations to anyone who asked. Before long, the entire village believed the strong merchant had been struck down. The community was kind. People brought food, prayed, even offered herbs and oils. But it was Nalia's reaction that struck Matumbo most deeply. When she heard the news, her eyes filled with tears. Not the kind that come all at once, but the kind that sit quietly, unable to fall. It was as if she knew something had ended. At first, she became the perfect caregiver. She rose early to make fresh porridge, warmed towels for his legs, washed his feet with gentleness even when he insisted it wasn't necessary. She called him my warrior and sang soft hymns beside his bed, and inside Matumbo wept. Maybe this was all he needed to see, but doubt is a slow-burning fire. It doesn't scorch, it smolders, so he watched. Even as he lay pretending, his eyes stayed alert, studying Nalia's every move. And slowly, something started to shift. Her hands, once so tender, became rushed. Her voice, once sweet, began to fade into something colder. Her gaze, once full of care, began to drift. The hardest part was realizing the change wasn't just in her. It was in him too. He began to see himself not as a victim, but as someone who had also let the silence grow between them. Someone who had stopped asking if she was happy. Someone who had forgotten to say, "I love you," out loud. One night, lying still in bed, he asked himself, what if this is my fault too? But it was too late. The lie was alive now, and it had its own path. To the village, Matumbo was brave. To Nalia, he was a suffering husband. But inside, he carried two burdens. The weight of a body that pretended to be broken, and the heart that truly was. Days passed. And then came the silence. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that suffocates. The kind that carries a truth no one wants to say. The room stopped smelling like healing. It began to smell like dust and routine. Nalia's steps grew heavier. Her hands still did the work, but the soul behind them began to vanish. At first, she washed his feet, prepared meals, and held his hand each night as she whispered prayers. She asked God to give her strength to carry the cross of our home. But love is not measured in duty alone. And slowly, her touch became lighter, then colder. Her prayers grew shorter, less heartfelt. Her eyes turned distant. She began to leave the room faster than before, and one night as he pretended to sleep, Matumbo heard it. A sigh, deep and long. Not of pain, not of sadness, but of someone too tired to pretend anymore. That sound, small and brief, broke something inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was the sigh of a woman whose heart no longer had the strength to lie. The next day, she didn't pray. She said nothing. She adjusted his blanket in silence, placed food beside him, and left without kissing his forehead like she used to. Matumbo stared at the closed door. The silence around him was louder than ever. The village kept moving. Women at the well, men in the square. But inside their home, something sacred was quietly unraveling. Nalia began going out more. At first she said she was visiting church. Then she stopped saying anything at all. She left with calm, firm steps and eyes that looked elsewhere. And Matumbo, stuck in his lie, felt smaller by the day. Not because she didn't shout or cry, but because she didn't even pretend anymore. There was no hate in her eyes, just absence, as if she were becoming a stranger, slowly forgetting who he had been to her. Then one evening, as golden sunlight slipped through the windows and painted the floor in soft orange, she stepped into the room. She looked at him quietly, for a few seconds, like she was trying to remember something she once held dear. Then, with no emotion, she adjusted his pillow and said, "The soup is on the table." She turned and walked out. No kiss, no question, no glance back, and Matumbo lay there, in the bed he had made for himself, trapped in the lie he once thought would save him. Staring up at the ceiling, he wondered where love had gone, wondered if it had ever been there to begin with. And the thought that hurt the most was this. Maybe he was the one who had let the silence grow until it swallowed everything that once made them whole. And the worst part was that he no longer knew if he wanted to keep pretending. But he also didn't have the courage to reveal the truth. Because deep down he knew the problem wasn't just what Nalia felt. It was what they had stopped building together. Years of unspoken words, ignored affection, swallowed pain. The lie that once seemed simple was now a prison. And each of her gestures, even the most ordinary, carried the weight of a judgment. The absence of the prayer, the poorly arranged plate, the silence after good night, everything turned into evidence against her or against himself. That night he didn't sleep. He listened to the sounds of the house, the wind at the windows, the crickets in the yard, the water dripping from a poorly closed faucet, and deep down the muffled sound of his own thoughts repeating a single phrase. Have I already lost, and only now am I seeing it? Because sometimes what seems like the beginning of a trial is merely the moment when the heart decides to open its eyes, and what it sees is not always what it wants to see. It was as if time, once just a detail between mornings and nights, had now become an implacable judge. Every minute that passed in that worn-out room seemed to deliver a new verdict on Matumbo and Nolia's relationship. And he, though lying down and pretending to be motionless, felt in his chest the growing weight of a truth he didn't dare fully face. The mornings no longer smelled the fresh coffee. The beans that once simmered slowly on the wood stove no longer bubbled with the same care. There were days when Nalia left without saying where she was going, and returned with distant eyes, showing no trace of haste to offer him company or comfort. Matbo noticed everything, even if he pretended to be asleep or too tired to talk. Indifference to someone who was once loved passionately tastes more bitter than abandonment itself. One night, while the sky outside hid stars behind heavy clouds, he noticed that she no longer prayed. The soft whispers that once filled the room with faith and hope had disappeared. She lay down in silence, turning to the edge of the bed, not even touching his fingers as she used to. It was as if God too had left that home, or perhaps had been pushed away by the coldness of their hearts. The kisses on the forehead, once a seal of affection, became absent, almost automatic gestures. Sometimes not even that. There were mornings when Nalia simply arranged the blanket and said, "I'm going out before leaving." Without even looking into Mumbo's eyes, he counted her steps in the hallway, feeling each one as another step away. Another thread cut in the web that had once united them, and then came the scent. One night, when she returned to the room, Nalia carried a different perfume on her body. It was sweet and strong, like a wet flower after rain. It wasn't the scent of the simple village soaps, nor the almond oil she used to wear. It was something new, elegant, that didn't match her simple clothes, nor the routine she claimed to have. Matbo inhaled that aroma as if reading a hidden note, and although nothing was said, everything was understood. He didn't ask. He couldn't. He was trapped in the role of the sick man, the paralyzed husband, the spectator of his own downfall. But inside an anguish lit up. It wasn't yet jealousy nor anger. It was something deeper. The feeling of no longer recognizing the woman who shared his roof. As if little by little, she was becoming a stranger, even under the same blanket. In the days that followed, she stayed out longer. Sometimes she said she was at the market, but returned without any bags. Other times she mentioned church, but her clothes didn't smell of candles, nor did her feet carry dust. Only that same sweet foreign perfume that seemed to mock Madame Beau's silence. He started noting details. The new scarf in her hair. The dark nail polish on her fingers different from the light tones she always used. The laughter that suddenly echoed in the yard while she talked at the gate. Laughter that didn't seem meant for him nor for the neighbors. And above all, the way she avoided the room, preferring to stay busy with long tasks in the kitchen or at the wash basin, as if afraid to be alone with her husband. But nothing hurt him as much as the night he needed her. The oil in the lamp had run out, and the room went dark earlier than usual. Matumbo, in his role as an invalid, called softly, "Nalia!" "Silence! Nalia, can you bring the lamp?" "Nothing," he called once more, and when she finally entered, her face was closed off. "I'm not your maid, Matumbo," she said in a tone heavy with old resentment. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because that simple, direct sentence brought to light a truth he had tried to deny for years, that perhaps he had never truly seen her as a partner, but as an extension of his home, his routine, his will. And now in that wheelchair, feigning weakness, he felt the weight of what it meant to be dependent, and maybe that was the worst punishment to feel on his own skin. What he had never dared to see in the heart of the woman who had been by his side for so long. One afternoon his brother Itambo came to visit him. "How are things?" he asked, looking at his brother's tired expression. "They're going as they have to," Matbo replied, avoiding his gaze. Itambo fell silent, then sat next to the wheelchair and said, "Silence also answers, Matbo. Sometimes it answers more than we want to hear." Those words echoed in Matbo's mind like the distant tolling of a bell. That night, alone in the dark room, Matumbo didn't pray. He didn't pretend. He didn't cry. He simply stared at the ceiling where a small crack grew each day, like the exact reflection of what had formed between him and Nalia. Assolent rift, unseen by anyone but growing without end. And then, in an almost imperceptible whisper, he murmured to himself, "What hurts most isn't the abandonment. It's realizing that I was present but never truly seen, because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with a kiss. It comes with the absence of love and with the silence of someone who gave up without saying goodbye." It was a warm Friday, one of those days when the heat feels heavier on your shoulders, and the village moves at the slow pace of corn sellers and barefoot children playing among the stones. Matumbo was alone in his room as always, pretending to sleep, but with his ears sharp for any sound at the gate. In recent days, Nalia's footsteps had become more frequent outside the house, and he, though silent, kept track of the absent. He knew the time she left, the time she returned, and the silence that lingered before she remembered there was still a husband waiting. That afternoon, he heard laughter, a male laugh, deep, the kind of laugh that belongs to someone too comfortable in a space that isn't theirs. He also heard her laugh short, half stifled, but it was a laugh of joy, of nostalgia, of embarrassment. He didn't know, but he felt his heart jump in his chest, as if something inside him whispered, "Today, something is going to change." The sound of footsteps grew louder, and soon the man appeared at the bedroom door, accompanied by Nalia. She, with a new headscarf and a slightly flushed face, introduced the visitor with a smile that hadn't been seen in ages. "This is Abby, a friend from school days. Abi, Abasi. The name sounded strange, foreign in the simple clay and tile house, but there was something more in the way Nalia said it, a softness that she usually didn't have, a restrained, almost forbidden affection. The man was tall, wearing a light linen shirt, neat trousers, and polished shoes that didn't match the village's dusty trails. He had the posture of someone used to being noticed, but spoke softly, almost diplomatically. He shook Matumbo's hand firmly, though Matbo kept his arm limp. Staying in character, "I heard about your accident, Matbo. I came to bring some encouragement." Encouragement? He thought. From whom? For whom? But he said nothing. He just gave a dry smile hidden behind his unshaven beard. Nalia, excited, brought juice, then cookies, then fruit. She seemed like a hostess receiving a king. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a sparkle that wasn't for him. Natiem Bibio from the wheelchair watched too much every detail. The way Nalia touched Abby's arm when she laughed. The time she took to answer his questions. The stories they told about the past. Stories he, the husband, had never heard. "Do you remember that teacher who always scolded us?" Abasi said, smiling. "I do," Nalia replied with a joy that seemed long forgotten. And then between laughs and memories. They talked about a youth where Matumbo did not exist, about Analia he perhaps had never truly known. His discomfort grew by the minute, but nothing compared to the moment when the visitor stood up and said, "I need to go, but I'll come back another time. I'll come back." Those words sounded like a threat. Matembo wanted to get up to scream to end the charade, but he stayed trapped in his lie because he knew now there was something deeper happening, something that couldn't be interrupted with screams, only understood. With pain, as soon as Abasi left, he expected Nalia to say something to justify, explain, ease the tension in the air, but she just cleared the cup, said, "I'll wash these," and disappeared into the kitchen without looking back, without even noticing that her husband was still there. His face pale with anguish, his mind boiling with questions he didn't dare ask. The next day, his brother Itambo returned. He came. He asked as if he already knew the answer. M didn't reply. He only looked at the floor, then at the window. The wind moved the curtain as if trying to soothe the words stuck in the room. "That man does not have good intentions," Itambo said firmly, his eyes hard as stone. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen that look on other faces. The look of someone who comes to take what isn't theirs, but knows they'll find little resistance." Matumbo felt his stomach tighten. For the first time since the start of his ruse, he felt afraid he had gone too far. Not afraid of being discovered, but of having waited too long to see that love, when not nurtured, doesn't die. It simply changes owners. And in the days that followed, Abasi returned twice, then 3 times. Never. At fixed times, always with small gifts, a sweet, a book, a colorful cloth. And each time he appeared, Nalia seemed more alive, more willing, more distant from Ambo's room. He there, motionless, began to understand that betrayal doesn't start with a touch. It begins in the gaze, and Nalia's gaze hadn't sought his for a long time. It was as if she was little by little remembering who she was before becoming a wife. As if in seeing Abasi again, she found pieces of Analia that married life had buried under pots, bills, and silences. Tembo in that wheelchair didn't just see the approach of another man. He saw the departure of a woman, his woman. And the worst of it was that he couldn't blame her, because deep down he knew that what was now blossoming between the two was watered by his own absence. The absence he himself had created over the years, even while present. On Abasi's last visit that week, Matumbo pretended to sleep, but his breathing was uneven, his face drenched in sweat. And when he heard Nalia laughing again, that light, free laugh that hadn't been heard in that house for years, a tear slid from his closed eyes. Because sometimes what destroys a love isn't the arrival of someone new. It's forgetting who we once were, and the silence of those who should have reminded us. The following week, the sun appeared timidly between the clouds, but the heat was the same as always, dense, suffocating, as if the village itself were breathing with difficulty. Matumbo remained in his post of silence in the wheelchair by the window, where the breeze barely reached. The days piled up like dry leaves, colorless, tasteless, wordless. But that day, something different broke the monotony of the room. A small, discreet glimmer, yet impossible to ignore. It was a necklace not like the ones Nalia used to wear to church festivals, made of simple beads or market trinkets. This was something fine, delicate, with a golden pendant shaped like a leaf. So light it looked as if it had been molded by the wind itself. And there it was, hanging around her neck, resting against her chest, like a silent declaration of change. Mumbo saw it, and in that instant he knew that didn't belong to the life they shared. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, far too long. He looked at the necklace, then at her eyes, and asked in a voice lower than usual, "Is it new?" She hesitated. It was only a second. But in that second he was certain something was hidden there. "I won it in a church raffle," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A church raffle. The words echoed inside him like an out-of-tune bell. He knew there were no raffles with prizes like that around there. And even if there were, why hadn't she mentioned it before? Why didn't she show it with the same joy she once showed new lipstick the neighbor had given her? There was something behind that story. Something she didn't want to say. Tembo, however, didn't question further. He just looked intently at the pendant, as if wanting to ask without words. But silence once again spoke for him, and her silence replied even louder. That night he remembered when he gave her the first gift. It was a wooden comb carved by a blind craftsman who lived across the village. A simple gift, but chosen with care, thinking of every detail. He'd asked for her name to be engraved with a thin knife, letter by letter. When he gave it to her, Nalia cried. She said it was the most beautiful object she had ever received, and she kept it as if it were a jewel. Now she wore something on her neck he didn't know. something expensive, something that didn't come from him. The memory of that comb returned so vividly that he almost felt the rough wood between his fingers. And along with it came the questions he'd never dared ask. When did they stop giving each other gifts? When did they stop surprising each other, looking into each other's eyes like they once did? When did their love become convenience? In the days that followed, the necklace accompanied her like a shadow. It was there when she went out to buy bread, when she washed clothes at the basin, when she sat in the living room with the radio playing softly. It was as if that small object symbolized a new phase, a new Nalia, one he could no longer reach. And each time he saw it, something inside him hurt. It wasn't the price of the gift. It wasn't fear of physical betrayal. It was what the gift represented. Attention, desire, novelty, things he had long since stopped offering and that now someone else seemed to remember to give. Then a timbre turned. He brought fresh fruit from the market as he always did and sat on the doorstep with his serene manner. The two brothers sat there for a few minutes saying nothing, just listening to the village sounds. The call of the cake seller, a baby's cry in the distance, the barking of dogs until a tambo said in a tone that seemed rehearsed by life itself. What is lost through neglect cannot be recovered through watts. Matibio looked at him sideways as if hearing something he already knew, but avoided accepting. I'm not saying she's gone, his brother continued, but maybe she got tired of waiting for you to truly see her. Those words cut like a knife because they were true. He had never let food run out, never lacked clean clothes or a sturdy roof. But how long had it been since he gave her a gesture of affection, a gift, a word of admiration, a compliment? The necklace shone on her neck like a mirror reflecting everything he had failed to do that night. While Nalia slept in the other room, Mumbo stayed awake, eyes fixed on the darkness. He thought of all the years that had passed, the forgotten birthdays, the hurried hugs, the interrupted conversations, how she had changed, and he hadn't even noticed. And once again the same question returned like a silent thunder. Has it always been this way? And I just never saw it, because some pains don't begin at the moment of loss. They sprout slowly in absence, in neglect, in the silence between one gesture and another, in the space between the soulless good morning and good night. And the necklace, that small necklace, was only the fruit of a garden he had forgotten to water. But now, perhaps it was too late to harvest anything with roots still left. The day dawned with a clear sky, but there was a strangeness in the air, a stillness that didn't come from nature, but from inside the house. It was a Saturday morning when Nalia usually made cornmeal cakes and left the radio playing the old hymns from the local parish program. But that day there was no smell of coffee, no sound of pots. There was only silence. Matumba woke up early as he had since starting to pretend his paralysis. But the room was empty. He looked around with sharp eyes, waiting for the sound of footsteps, the scrape of a chair in the kitchen, Nalia's soft voice humming at him. Nothing, only the distant sound of a rooster and the heavy breathing of his own anguish. 2 hours passed, then 3. The wheelchair stood by the bed as usual, but he didn't use it. He stayed lying down, waiting. The sunlight stretched across the floor, marking the hours with a cruel slowness. His stomach began to ache, not just from hunger, but from the realization that that day he had been forgotten. Then a tambo arrived. He came in without knocking as he had since they were boys, carrying a bag with bread and bananas. When he saw his brother still lying down, his expression changed immediately. She didn't give you breakfast. She isn't here, he answered in a dry, almost whispered voice. What do you mean? She said yesterday she was going on a retreat at church just for a day. It fell silent. His eyes swept across the room, seeing the towel still hanging. Last night's plate untouched. The empty water bottle by the bed. Everything there screamed abandonment. Not the scandalous, cruel kind, but the invisible kind, disguised as an excuse. His brother approached, adjusted the pillow, picked up the towel, and said firmly, You need a bath. Matebo didn't answer. He simply let his brother lift him carefully, as if he truly couldn't move his legs. The act now hurt more than the truth because for the first time he felt the weight of what it meant to depend on someone and not be remembered. While Itambo washed his back with a warm cloth, swallowing the words boiling in his throat, Matambo felt an urge to confess, to say it was all a lie, that he regretted it, that he couldn't bear to pretend any longer. But shame held him back. The guilt weighed on his shoulders like chains. After the bath, Itambo prepared something simple to eat. Mashed banana with flour and a bit of milk. They sat on the porch in silence, eating like two old men who had already said everything, but knew the most important things were still unspoken. Do you think, Matbo began hesitantly, that she still loves me? His brother chewed slowly before answering. Love. Love isn't just caring. Love is staying. It's caring when no one's watching, and sometimes absence answers louder than any words. Matambo lowered his eyes. The spoon trembled in his hand. Has it always been this way? And I just never saw it. That question echoed like a hammer inside him. It was the same question that had repeated since the first signs, since the first silence, since the first cold gesture. And now it seemed to scream. For the rest of the day, Nalia didn't return. No news, no neighbors brought messages, no note on the door, no explanation. The afternoon dragged on and the sun set slowly, as if reluctant to say goodbye. Matumbo returned to the room. He sat in the wheelchair but didn't look outside. He faced the mirror, observing himself, the wrinkles, the thinning hair, the sunken eyes. It was the first time in years he looked at himself with such attention. What he saw wasn't just the reflection of an aged, tired, suspicious man. He saw someone who let time pass without asking if he was still loved. Someone who thought providing food and shelter was enough. Someone who confused presence with love. The sky darkened, and the house was enveloped in a sad twilight. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the insects outside and a distant radio playing an old song about longing. When Nalia finally returned, it was already night. She entered with quiet steps, making no noise, not calling for him. The kitchen light turned on, then off. He heard the water running, then the bathroom door closing. No words, no explanation. And then, for the first time since he had started pretending to be paralyzed, Matbo cried. Not the desperate cry of someone who loses something, but the contained silent cry of someone who finally understands the depth of their own absence. Because what hurt most wasn't the possibility that she was with someone else. It was realizing that perhaps he had never truly been with her. And there, in that dark room, without prayer, without a warm meal, without affection, he understood that his trial was not the feigned weakness of his body, but the repentance of his soul. Thought it was the price of someone who waited too long to hear the other's silence. And sometimes silence is the cruelest answer of all. Sunday dawned calm with a sky of thin clouds like Abradal Vale. The village woke up slowly with the smell of freshly baked bread and the muffled sound of children running through narrow alleys. It was a day for mass, for the market, for families gathered under the shade of cashew trees. But for Matbo, that would be a day of revelation. Still in bed, he heard the sound of the door opening. Quick steps. Nalia was leaving once again without explanation, leaving only a hurried note on the table. I'll be back in the afternoon. Need to resolve something important. No signature, no kiss, not even a glance, as if he were a piece of furniture, an object of use, not a life companion. He stayed motionless for long minutes, listening to the birds and the rustling of dry leaves being swept in the neighbor's yard. His heart beat faster, not from physical fear, but from a premonition growing like a weed. That day would bring something he was not yet ready to see. When a tambo arrived, bringing cassava and avocado from the market, he found his brother with open eyes, pale face, and restless hands. Today, Matbo said, his voice almost fading. Today, you need to know. His brother looked at him for a moment, then nodded like someone who accepts an inevitable fate. I'll follow her steps and bring back whatever there is to bring. Tambo left without fuss. He knew the village paths as one knows the secrets of one's own blood. He walked slowly, blending in with the people moving along the dirt streets. He passed by the church, the market, the pharmacy, and then in the central square he stopped, sat on a bench beneath the big baobab tree, and waited. It didn't take long. She appeared. Nalia in the same blue dress she had, worn at her niece's birthday, hair carefully tied up necklace, shining on her neck, and next to her Abazi, the elegant visitor, the friend from her youth. The two walked side by side. They didn't touch, didn't embrace, but they laughed, and they laughed with a lightness no longer seen in Matimbo's house. There was no kiss, no scandal. But there was something even deeper: intimacy. That kind of connection that doesn't need words, that shows in the A-bodies leaned toward each other, in how their eyes meet, in how time seems to pause around them. Tambo watched from a distance. He didn't want to hear what they were saying. He didn't need to. What he saw was enough. After a while, he stood up and returned. When he entered the house, he found Matbo in the same position. But there was a stiffness in his body now that was no longer fake. It was real. It was pain. And Matbo asked, voice trembling. Tambo sat in front of him, lowered his eyes, and said, "She didn't betray you with her body, but she forgot your soul." The words fell like a stone in the center of his chest. Matambo didn't reply. He just closed his eyes and let the image take shape inside him. The wife, the other men, the light laughter, the necklace shining in the sun. Everything that had once been his now seemed to belong somewhere else. But it wasn't jealousy that consumed him. It was absence. His absence in her life, and the presence of someone who, even after so many years, knew how to see what he no longer did. He stayed there for hours, saying nothing, replaying all the moments he had let slip, the conversations he ignored, the dreams she kept to herself because she knew he wouldn't listen, the way she slowly fell silent until she disappeared inside. And then he remembered. He remembered the day she said, "You don't hear me anymore." Remembered when she asked to travel just the two of them. And he replied, "Why waste money on nonsense?" Remembered that last time she cried, not from an argument, but from loneliness. And he pretended not to see Dot outside. The day faded slowly. The golden light painted the leaves, and the children began returning home with dirty feet and happy faces. Inside the room, however, time felt frozen. Matbo, alone, looked at the ceiling with dry eyes, but a soul soaked. He finally understood that the most painful betrayal is not the hidden kiss. It is the heart that leaves even when the body stays. And there on that quiet Sunday afternoon, the truth arrived. Not like thunder, but like a whisper that said she got tired of being invisible. And now he could clearly see everything he had refused to acknowledge. Because sometimes losing someone isn't watching them leave. It's realizing they haven't truly been there for a long time. The following week began without major events, but with the heavy air of unspoken truths. It was as if the house had learned to breathe on its own, sighing silently in the corners, while Nalia and Matbo continued to pretend to play the roles they once inhabited with soul. She kept taking care of the house, going out at vague hours, returning with that same subtle perfume that so unsettled her husband, and he remained in his chair, trapped between the lie of the body and the truth that now burned in his eyes. But everything changed on an ordinary morning. One of those when the roosters crow at odd times and the wind carries the smell of the market through the windows. Nalia had left in a rush, forgetting her purse on the kitchen chair. Matbo, alone, was watching the curtains sway when a piece of paper slipped from the half-open zipper and drifted slowly to the floor. Like a tired leaf from an old tree, he approached slowly, pushing the chair with effort, as if still afraid of breaking his own lie. When he picked up the paper, he saw it was a small note folded 3 times with ink slightly smudged to sign. It had been written in a hurry, or perhaps with too much emotion. At the top, it read only one sentence. "He doesn't walk, but he never truly saw you." It was as if time stopped in that instant. That note wasn't a direct accusation. There was no signature, no date, no greeting, but it was without doubt a confession. A declaration of what hurt most, not the betrayal of touch, but the pain of not being seen, of not being truly seen by someone who promised to be a partner for life, of living beside a man who had always been more a physical presence than an emotional one, but stared at the paper like someone looking into a mirror for the first time in years, and he saw himself completely there. In the words he never spoke, the gestures he forgot, the silences he offered his answers to each of Nalia's silent cries, he felt the note cut deeper than any sharp knife. Not because of the suspicion of another love, but because of the certainty of his own emotional absence. The sentence was short, but it held decades inside. He doesn't walk. Yes, it was true. Now he pretended to be bound to the chair, but for years he'd already stopped walking with her through life. He no longer shared dreams, fears, laughter. The body was at home, but the soul wandered far. But he never truly saw you. And this was the deepest wound, not seeing her, not noticing the woman who matured by his side, who sacrificed youth, beauty, time, and faith to keep the house alive. The children fed the days in order. And even so she was ignored, invisible, unappreciated. Mumbo read the sentence once more, then folded the paper with trembling hands, as if trying to wrap up his own regret. He didn't tear it, didn't burn it, didn't throw it away. He kept it in his shirt pocket like someone who keeps the last memento of something lost that cannot be recovered. Nalia returned later with a distracted smile and a sack of flour. When she saw the purse in the same place and noticed the zipper more open, she frowned slightly, but she said nothing. Perhaps she felt that something had changed in the air, but didn't yet know what. Matbo didn't mention the note, didn't confront her, didn't make a scene. He just watched her with a new sadness in his eyes. Not the sadness of someone who suspects, but of someone who understands, who finally accepts that there is no turning back when love has ended. That night he didn't sleep. He stayed with the note in his hands, tracing each letter as if trying to decipher not what was written, but what had gone unsaid. And he understood then that the words that hurt most are not the ones shouted in anger. They are the ones that arrive in silence, fallen by accident yet heavy with truth. In the morning he didn't ask for coffee, didn't ask for help, didn't ask for anything. He stayed there sitting with the note in his pocket and his soul in pieces, because now he knew he no longer needed to pretend to be paralyzed. The pain he felt was real, and it was in his legs, yes, but also in his chest, in his broken pride, in his wounded dignity. When Etambo arrived, Matimbo only looked at him with hollow eyes and said, almost voiceless, "I never saw her." His brother nodded in silence without needing to ask anything, because in that moment between two men, silence was enough to say everything. And so the note lost by accident felt like a sentence on the story of a marriage already corroded from within. Because there are truths that do not arrive with screams. They simply fall like leaves at the exact moment the soul is finally ready to see them. The next day was born cloudy with a colder wind than usual. Asif, the sky itself, carried in its clouds the weight of an inevitable ending. Matbo woke up earlier than usual. He spent long minutes sitting on the edge of the bed, his feet on the ground, feeling the cold clay floor under hissels. His eyes were fixed on the old wardrobe, but his mind wandered deep inside himself, sifting through memories, silently, building a decision he knew he could no longer postpone. The time had come. The note was still in his shirt pocket, carefully folded like a sacred secret. But now he no longer needed to read it. The sentence was engraved inside him like a tattoo on the soul. He doesn't walk, but he never truly saw you. It was the rawest, simplest, and most devastating truth he had ever faced. For years, Matimbo had prided himself on being a righteous man. He was the one who provided for the house, put food on the table, commanded respect. But he had never been the man who listened with his heart. Never the husband who asked how she felt, the partner who saw the woman beyond the role of wife and caretaker. And now, through the far of paralysis, what he discovered was more cruel than any physical betrayal. He had lost her from the inside, long before any other man ever approached from the outside. He stood up, not in haste nor in anger, but with the weight of someone walking to their own judgment. He rose slowly, feeling his legs respond with firmness. A firmness he had hidden for weeks. As part of the theater he set up to test his wife's love. He walked to the porch, where the rocking chair still held the shape of Nalia's body. He sat there in silence, waiting. The sky began to open, and the light filtered through the clouds, painting the ground with shades of gold and shadow. The village children ran past, playing and laughing loudly, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside that faded walled house. Some neighbors glanced over, noticing Matimbo standing again. But they didn't approach. They knew with the instinct of those who live in community that a truth was unfolding there that didn't belong to them. And then she arrived. Nalia came with firm steps, a bag of vegetables in one hand and the necklace shining against her chest. When she saw him sitting on the porch, upright and looking straight at her, she stopped. For an instant, she seemed not to understand. Then her eyes widened. The bag fell from her hand. A tomato rolled to the middle of the road. "Me," she said, her voice breaking as if speaking to a ghost. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, not with anger, nor with accusation, but with the kind of sadness that doesn't fit in words. I stood up. "Nalia," he finally said, because there was no reason to pretend anymore. She took a step back as if the ground had given way. "How long?" she whispered. "From the start, the accident never happened. I just wanted to know if you still loved me." The silence between them was as heavy as the dust rising from the road. She looked at him, at his strong hands on his knees, at his feet firmly planted on the ground. And then she looked away. "And what did you find out?" The question came like a blade, but he was already too wounded to bleed again. "I discovered that perhaps betrayal isn't in what you do, but in what we stop doing for each other. I became invisible to you, and you became a stranger to me." Nalia pressed her lips together. Her eyes shimmered, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Do you want to know when I stopped loving you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "I do. I need to hear it." She took a deep breath, as if digging inside herself for the last bit of courage. "It was the day you started to doubt me. Not now. Years ago, when you began to look at me as someone to evaluate, not to admire. When every gesture of mine was seen as a debt. When I stopped being a woman and became just an obligation." Her words were sharp, but not cruel. There was no hatred, only pain. And it was that pain that hurt Matambo the most, because he knew she was wasteling the truth. A truth he had refused to see for too long. "I never betrayed you, Matimbo, but I was never loved as I deserved. And one day I got tired of trying to be seen." The wind blew slowly, lifting dust from the road. The cashew tree leaves swayed like silent witnesses to that reckoning. Matambo lowered his head. He felt smaller than ever, because now there was no more pretending. His lie had revealed not her guilt, but their mutual abandonment. An abandonment that starts small in the details and one day becomes so big it swallows even the memory of what was once love. She picked up the fallen bag, picked up the tomato from the ground, cleaned it with the edge of her dress, and turned to him with tear-filled eyes. "I didn't leave you, Matbo. You were the one who left first. He just took too long to notice." And then she went inside, leaving him there sitting with a heart heavier than his own mistakes. Because the hardest confrontation is the one where the guilty party recognizes themselves in the mirror and understands too late that love doesn't die suddenly. It dies slowly in the silence of days, in the absence of gestures, in the blindness of hearts. The house was quiet. A deep silence took over every room, as if the words spoken on the porch had sealed the fate of that home. Mimbo remained there, motionless, no longer out of pretense but paralyzed by emotion. His eyes didn't blink. Fixed on the door Nalia had crossed after pouring out her truth without hatred, but with a pain that burned more than any punishment. Hina knew that the damage was not only in the lie he had created, but in the truths he had avoided all his life. What hurt most wasn't imagining she might have feelings for another man. What truly hurt was realizing that the love that once existed had been slowly buried, and he had held the shovel the whole time without noticing. He stayed there 4 hours replaying each detail, each word, each misunderstood silence. The sun had already dipped behind the hills when he finally stood up, walking through the house like a man visiting ruins. He stopped in the bedroom where clothes still lay folded with the care of someone who no longer loves but still respects. He touched the sheet, her pillow, smelled the scent still clinging to the fabric, and for the first time understood how much she had resisted. Yes, Nalia had resisted for many years. She had waited for him to see her, to ask how she was, to say something beyond practical obligations. She wanted to be seen, heard, touched with tenderness. Not just marital duty, but he, Matbo, had become a man who did not look, who only provided, ordered, controlled. A man who confused presence with participation, silence with stability, habit with love. Now he saw with the brutal clarity that only pain brings. She was in the room packing a small suitcase. It wasn't rushed nor an escape. It was a farewell. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. She just folded clothes, putting a few pieces inside as if already knowing that the heaviest things wouldn't fit there. The memories, the wasted years, the stifled dreams. He stood at the door, eyes brimming, but his face serene. He spoke in a low voice. "You're leaving." She kept folding without looking at him. "I am with him." She stopped for an instant. Time seemed to hold its breath. "No, not with him. I'm going with what's left of myself." That phrase cut deeper than 1,000 accusations because it showed that she wasn't leaving for someone else, but to reclaim what she had lost by living beside someone who never saw her. "Do you still love me?" he asked, almost voiceless. She took a deep breath, stood up, and looked into his eyes with a steadiness that came from very deep within. "Love needs space to breathe, and here it suffocated a long time ago. I tried, Mumbo. I tried until the end, but what you did, this test, showed me you never truly trusted me. And without trust, there is no love." He wanted to reply, wanted to beg for forgiveness, to implore her to stay, to promise change, but he didn't, because he finally understood that some pleas only work when love still breathes, and hers had already been buried. She finished closing the suitcase, walked past him without anger, only with a look that mixed gratitude for the past and mourning for the present. She stopped at the door, looked up at the already dark sky and said, almost like a prayer, "May God take care of you, and may you learn to see before you lose again." And she left, not in a rush, but with dignity. Matumbo returned to the living room, sat in the rocking chair, and let himself be carried away by the sound of the distant owls. Tears fell, discreet like fine rain on an old roof. But it wasn't crying for her. It was for everything that could have been, and wasn't. Itambo arrived early in the night. He found his brother with his head down, eyes lost, and a soul washed clean. "She's gone. She's gone." The brother sat next to him, and for a few minutes, they just listened to the sounds of the night. "Will you go after her?" M shook his head. "No, now she needs distance, and I need truth." Itambo nodded. Then he got up, went to the cabinet, and brought paper, a pen, and a small oil lamp. "Write not for her, for yourself." And that's what he did. That night, for the first time in many years, Matumbo wrote not a plea, not a speech, but a letter to himself, a confession, a farewell, a silent promise, never to live without truly seeing again. And at the end of the letter, he wrote, "Love does not die when it leaves. But when we stop trusting." He folded the paper, placed it on the table, and looked up at the sky. Because sometimes justice does not come as punishment. It comes as awareness, and that never stops hurting.